we're going to like talk about predominantly the New Kingdom today. I'll kind of talk a little bit about the Middle Kingdom, just a little bit briefly about it before I kind of move on to talk about mostly that period. I'll kind of also talk about the second intermediate period that kind of occurs right before the New Kingdom comes in. I think if you go back here, we were talking about previously the Old Kingdom, part 2 lecture. I had discussed predominantly the pyramid building. Then I think the last thing I did is I talked about the development of like hieroglyphic language of Egypt, Egyptian language. And of course, the most famous thing, of course, was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, of course, found in 1799. Now, if you go look at this historical periods, of course, they had the Middle Kingdom, which I'll just briefly talk about. The Middle Kingdom was not as famous as the Old and the New Kingdom. It's mostly known for just having like 1 or 2 major dynasties, which it peaked with the 12th dynasty. That period was a period of where Egypt began to shift more towards like the south, like so-called Upper Egypt, especially Thebes is kind of becomes a major city at that time. And pyramid building starts to end. I think the 12th dynasty was one of the last major dynasties to build like major pyramids, but they weren't built very well. I don't know if you ever seen pictures of them. I used to kind of sometimes teach about them, but like fell apart. There's nothing like the ones before a long time ago. They then had this other period that kind of came in, which I kind of talked a little bit about. I think maybe I mentioned it before. Before you have the rise of the New Kingdom, there's the so-called second intermediate period that kind of occurs around the 16th, 17th centuries of BC. I don't know if you know much about the intermediate periods, but they're often called nicknames. They're often called like first illness, second illness, third illness. These are like the ancient names that they used to call them. But there's like these intermediate periods that kind of occur between the kingdoms when Egypt kind of breaks apart. It's not like a unified state or anything like that. So second intermediate period is really considered one of the most famous periods, I guess, before the New Kingdom came in. What happened was Egypt was invaded by these people called the Hyksos, which were a type of Semitic peoples, Semitic Asiatic type peoples that lived in the Levant or close to where what they call Canaan is, which would be like around Israel in Lebanon. They had some kind of kingdom or state that was there. Sometime in the 17th century, they eventually invaded and took over Egypt, especially the lower part of Egypt was taken over by them. The Hyksos were interesting. They brought in new kinds of weapons, like bronze. I guess they had bronze weapons kind of at the time, but they brought in like the horse-drawn chariot was introduced to Egypt along with horses, and then also that composite bow, which I think developed more in Asia, was also introduced, and they were able to eventually take over like at least half of Egypt, at least the lower part of Egypt was eventually taken over by them. I think Gavin's asking a bunch of questions or whatever, but administrative stuff, you just email me about it if you don't mind talking about it. It's a history thing about history. I'll just send me comments, whatever, but administrative stuff, just email me about that if you don't mind. But anyway, so the Hyksos, a lot of the information about them comes from really one source is the main source on it, which is Flavius Josephus, who wrote a series of books about 2,000 years ago. Did my dissertation on him years ago, but he's got some information from Manetho, from that history of Egypt, and Manetho was the original source, of course, on the Hyksos. But Flavius Josephus thought that the Hyksos were somehow related to the Israelite or Hebrew type peoples that came into Egypt, which is possible because they think maybe the Hebrews may have entered Egypt close to about the same time. And the translation of the name Hyksos in Greek, it means either rulers of foreign lands, I think is the common translation that usually means, or if you wanted to say foreign kings for short, or foreign rulers, that's usually what it means. Josephus thought that, I think he said the name meant shepherd kings because he thought that they were related to the Hebrews or Israelites who were known as shepherds and things like that. But they don't think that's true now. They think that it's a mistranslation, and so that's the common translation of what the name meant. What they think happened over time was the Hyksos were eventually driven out by this king named King Ahmose. Ahmose was considered one of the first major kings of the 18th dynasty, and he's the one that started what became known as the New Kingdom, which would come in. The New Kingdom will have 3 dynasties, 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. I think about 31 pharaohs are part of the New Kingdom that are there. And the New Kingdom is a type of empire that was a lot larger than, of course, the one of the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom previously. The New Kingdom was an empire that expanded all the way into southwestern Asia. In fact, they got all the way, you know about this, up into Syria at one point, and they were kind of a rival state to the Hittites, who were around mostly Turkey. And so at one point, the New Kingdom controlled territory that included Egypt, Libya, Sudan. They controlled pretty much, where the Sinai Peninsula is, and then also Israel, Lebanon, and of course part of Syria. So it's a massive empire that, of course, that was much bigger than the previous ones that were there before. And really, the New Kingdom is the peak of really the Egyptian state before the Iron Age comes in, because in the Iron Age, the New Kingdom, the Egypt will decline, is what will happen. Oh, by the way, the New Kingdom, I was mentioning about the dynasties. So 18th, 19th, 20th dynasties, of course, make it up. Of course, they have nicknames for them. The 18th dynasty is often called the Tutmosid dynasty because of the fact that there were like several pharaohs that were named Tutmosis or Tutmos, as it said either way. I think there's like 4 of them. So they kind of call it that nickname, basically. Like Tutmos the First was the most famous one, I think, early on. He was the father of Hatshepsut later. And then the 19th and 20th dynasty is often called the Ramesses dynasty or Ramessids because of the fact that there were like 11 pharaohs by the name Ramses, like Ramses the Great, Ramses II, most famous one of the 19th dynasty. And so Ramses was kind of a popular name. Also, there was a kind of a revigoration of the god Ra, kind of came back and it was synchronized with the god Amun at that time. So, there's other things too about the New Kingdom that's kind of famous that I think you've probably heard about, but they're famous for a lot of temple construction. Like you read in the Bible how the Hebrews are building all these buildings and all that. Yeah, they're building temples, not pyramids. And of course, the most famous thing they built was the Karnak temple complex, which is where modern Luxor is today, which they call ancient Thebes. And Karnak was the largest temple ever built in the world. I think it was about 250 acres in size. And it's famous for its hypostyle hall, which I'll kind of show you later a little bit, which was built by the time of Ramses the Great. And then, so yeah, Thebes became like its religious center, kind of like a capital in Egypt. And then the other thing they're known for too, the New Kingdom, starting with Tutmos the First, the 3rd pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, they began constructing a new necropolis site, which of course is the Valley of the Kings. And if you know about it, the pharaohs began constructing these rock-cut tombs where they began to bury into the bedrock of mountains to bury their dead, and I guess to hide all the treasures of the pharaohs. And they would build, like at one point, 62 tombs would be built in the Valley of the Kings. I think I've got a picture kind of showing you the Valley of the Kings here. they have a Valley of the Queens too, as well, where some of the female nobility were kind of buried as well. But all the tombs were robbed, just about, except if you know about this King Tut's tomb, we'll talk about later. KV 62 was the only one found intact in modern Egypt in early 20th century, and all of that. And so, yeah, they were trying to hide all these tombs, but they ended up, like I said, getting robbed. It's true. And I think it's because all the workers knew where they built the tombs, and they came back and robbed them later, etc. All right, let me, of course, move on. And I did want to talk about some of the pharaohs that were kind of famous in, like, the New King, especially with I'll mostly talk about the 18th dynasty. Yeah, they talked about in that short video, Queen Hatshepsut, of course, considered one of the very few female rulers that ancient Egypt has overall. In fact, she's considered, by the way, the only major female pharaoh they had of the New Kingdom. Sometimes they count Queen Nefertiti. It's kind of briefly ruling as well as pharaoh, but she was the fifth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Of course, the greatest female ruler pretty much of the New Kingdom. She reigned in the 15th century, that should be, of course. And they kind of explain like why she came into power. Her husband actually was, I'll give you his name, but his name was Thutmose II, who was the son of Thutmose I. He died young, like I think around the age of 30. And so that's how she ended up becoming the pharaoh, because her basically, I think it was like her stepbrother, I think was what she was married to. I don't know if you know, but a lot of times the stepbrother would marry the stepsister. It's like, pharaohs would have multiple wives, and then they would have like a son on one side, a daughter on the other, and they kind of marry each other to keep the lineage going, which created a lot of, inbreeding, which was why some pharaohs like King Tut had problems, sickness and all that kind of thing because of all the inbreeding and all that. But yeah, so basically that's why she came in, because her husband died so young, 30 or 31, I think is when he died, I think, at that age. And so, yeah, she had this, it's really, it said nephew in the video. It's kind of like a nephew stepson, I guess, kind of. Thutmose III or Thutmose III, who was supposed to be the pharaoh, but he was like an infant. And so she basically reigned in his place. It's what happened. So they consider her reign to be a golden age. Like during her time in power, the Egyptians began trading throughout different parts of the world. They talk about, I think in the video, how they trade with the land of Punt, which P-U-N-T, which I think there's kind of a debate about. It's in Ethiopia or Somalia. It's where it is. And so they traded there, Middle East. Also under her reign, they expanded into the Sudan. I think they expanded into the Levant as well, like close to where Sinai, Israel is as well. So they start kind of, expanding the Egyptian empire at that time. She's also known for her building projects. They talked about that too in the video, how she built one of the largest obelisks ever constructed in ancient Egypt, which was built where the Karnak temple complex is. And then, of course, her Temple of Hatshepsut is also very famous as well. I think I've got some pictures of her temple, which are kind of well known today. It's called different names. The common name they sometimes call it is the Temple of Hatshepsut, or Temple of Queen Hatshepsut, which is located in western Thebes. A lot of the pharaohs built a lot of these so-called mortuary temples across from where Luxor or Thebes is today in Upper Egypt. And it was built by this government official of some type who was like either a vizier or a chancellor of some type, who was an architect named Senenmut. He designed it, he built it. I think there's even some kind of theory that Senenmut may have been like a lover of Hatshepsut, because Hatshepsut never, I guess, remarried or whatever. So they think they may have been lovers, but they're not sure about that. That's kind of questionable about that deal. They sometimes call it an Arabic name, which is Deir al-Bari. I think they were kind of mentioned about that nickname in the video, but it means supposedly the northern monastery, because the Christian Copts, sometimes the Coptic Christians, but sometimes used as a monastery or church. But it later collapsed. I want to say earthquakes destroyed it or something like that. And it was later rebuilt in modern times. Like in the 20th century, 21st century, they're trying to restore it to what they think it looked like. And it is famous for its causeway that runs up to it. I think they rebuilt the causeway. Here you see. But it's got a lot of these statues of Osiris, the king of the dead, that kind of was built there to honor him. And I guess her reign and all that. So that's something she's kind of famous for. The Temple of Hatshepsut, which is kind of considered one of the greatest temples ever built, by the way, in ancient Egypt. But that's what they think it looks like, from what they rebuilt, of course, and all that. They were talking about her nephew, Tutmosis III. He reigned afterwards. They think he erased a lot of her monuments, like took her statues and buried them. They didn't want to know a female was reigning as pharaoh, about that. But he was known for being a great conqueror. I think they sometimes call him Egypt's Napoleon, I think is a nickname they called him, because he was kind of short, but great military mind. And he was known for, I think, conquering pretty much most of Nubia, which is like Sudan. And then he also pushed the empire up into like the Levant, like around Canaan and all that. So under him, they start really, expanding the empire. And it becomes like an empire which is in two continents, Africa and, part of Southwest Asia, etc. Now I'm going to move on. I'm going to talk about also another pharaoh that's kind of well known. Here's another image if you want to see of course, of the temple, which is right there. I did want to talk about Akhenaten, who came in, which was isn't there twice. But anyway, you got Akhenaten. I don't know if you heard about him. He has different names. He's called originally Amenhotep IV. There were like, I think, 4 pharaohs with that name at one point. He was later called Akhenaten, and he was this pharaoh in the 14th century that was kind of radical. And they called him a nickname. They called him the heretic. And he's one of these pharaohs that the Egyptians hated. In fact, they struck him from the record of all the different pharaohs of that period. They didn't want anybody to know he existed at one point. Why was he radical? He was considered radical because of the fact that Akhenaten was famous for experimenting with this new cult, which was kind of somewhat monotheistic. And he forced all the Egyptians to adopt a new main cult, which was based on a god that was called the Aten, the sun disk god, they call it. I think I've got an image showing you him and showing you also Akhenaten. He's kind of a strange man if you look at images of him. And here's an image on the right showing the sun disk right here. The Aten was a type of ancient god that went back, they think, to the Old Kingdom originally, and he kind of brought it to the forefront as a major god. It was done that to mostly replace the god Amen, which was, the state god, etc. And he was hoping to I think, give the pharaoh more power, because I don't know if you know much about the cult of Amen in the Temple of Karnak. The priests that controlled the cult were very powerful. I think there's like 200-300 priests within it. And so he banned basically people from worshiping the god Amen and other gods. And then how the religion supposedly worked was that the people would worship him basically as a god, and he would worship the god Aten. That's how it's supposed to work, pretty much, because the pharaohs are seen as living gods, if you know about that. And so one of the things that he did, which is famous, he moved the capital. Oh, but first of all, he changed his name. He changed his name to Akhenaten, which means in the translation there, living spirit of the Aten. That's what the name meant. So he kind of put the name in his name, Aten, you can see. And then the other thing he did was he moved the actual capital from Thebes to a new cult center in Middle Egypt. The city was called Akhenaten, which meant, in hieroglyphs, it meant horizon of the Aten. And it was this mud brick city that he built in just a matter of a few years. He built it like real quick, less than a decade. And it was actually a huge city that was, I think, bigger than, Thebes. But it later fell apart because of mud brick. But the Arabs today call it sometimes Tel El Amarna, or just Amarna, which is kind of like halfway between like where Cairo is and Luxor today. And so that's why they sometimes call the period when he's in power the Amarna period, because he reigned from there for a bunch of years. If you know about him, he had this famous wife and consort that was well known. I think everybody's heard of Queen Nefertiti. She's considered, by the way, to be one of the most famous Egyptian queens in history. Like that bust you're looking at is considered to be one of the most famous of any queen like ever found. The bust of Nefertiti, is called the Nefertiti bust, of course, was discovered in 1912. Depicts her what they think she looked like. So I guess it's been kind of restored or whatever. But it was found in some kind of workshop at Amarna that existed where they built statues of her. And I guess she must have been worshipped or something like that, idolized like Akhenaten was. And currently it's in a German museum, like in Germany. It's kind of controversial because the Egyptians want it back. They do, like the Rosetta Stone. And so it's considered one of the greatest images of any, like, I think, ancient Egyptian, like in history. So she may have been beautiful, like they said. I think her name meant something like the beautiful one has come or something like that, basically. And they think she may have ruled briefly as pharaoh, which is true for like maybe a few years after Akhenaten died. She may have also helped to kind of raise Tutankhamen, who was the son of also Akhenaten as well. So, but what happened after Akhenaten died and all that, and I guess he died, pretty much the cults all reverted back to the old traditional religions, Amen and so on. They even moved the capital back to Thebes. And so the whole thing was a bust. You know, this cult that he was trying to push on everybody, etc. I don't know if it was a true monotheistic cult like you see later with, say, Judaism and other religions later. You've got Zoroastrianism or whatever, but it's kind of similar to that a little bit. All right, now I'm going to talk about next what happened, of course, after Akhenaten, of course, died and all that. You have another, of course, pharaoh that comes in, which is Tutankhamen, I think is how they usually pronounce it. That's usually the common name, of course. Or, of course, King Tut, of course, the short name, they dub him as well. He briefly reigned as pharaoh for like less than 9 or 10 years was, I think, the reign of King Tut pretty much. And as you know, he's known as the boy king. He's called that because of the fact that he reigned as a young man, young boy, for just a few years during his reign. His reign's not known for much. I think most of his advisors, ministers, pretty much controlled the country. They restored pretty much like the cults. They moved the capital back to Thebes. These are all things that pretty much happened under King Tut's reign. And I think he came to power maybe when he was 9. And I think some believe he was like maybe about, I want to say 17 or 18 or 19 when he died. He's also the last major king of the 18th dynasty. There were only 13 kings, like pharaohs, of the 18th dynasty. He's like the 11th one. And the other 2 that came later were all ministers that kind of ruled afterwards, that were in power. And they weren't really related back to the original 18th dynasty. But kind of talk about some of the things that he's known for. Obviously, he's known for his death. Prematurely, He died, like I said, at a very young age. Like most pharaohs usually lived older, they usually die young. Uh, and um, and of course, I'll get to it later. He's known for his tomb, King Tut's tomb, KV 62, the last one, major tomb, of course, found in the Valley of the Kings. It's known for being one of the very only one, I guess, that was not robbed, that they found pretty much intact in the Valley of the Kings. A little video there, of course, on King Tutankhamen, King Tut and his, of course, coffin there. They show, of course, which was made of wood and also gold. Yeah, it was pretty heavy. Like I think they said that the whole thing, like at least one of them, weighed about 200 pounds. So these things were pretty heavy, and so there were actually 3 of those. So I guess total together, you're looking at about 600 pounds, the whole thing together. So anyway, there's a few things I did want to talk about. King Tut, that's well known. Of course, I do have a few other pictures I've got here. He did have a wife. His consort was Akhenaten. You may have heard of her. They had 2 children, but they died right after they were born. So they had no real heirs that, of course, followed. So I think they had twins or something like that, and they died. So that's why the throne then went to one of his ministers, of course, later. It's kind of funny. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, The Mummy. They kind of use her as a character, as the woman that the mummy priest wants to bring back alive. It's kind of weird about that. And then Imhotep as the priest, just from like going back to the Old Kingdom. So I don't know why they did that, but anyway, that's kind of funny about that. But of course, there's one thing that's well known about King Tut's tomb and all that. And you may have heard about the so-called curse of King Tut's tomb. I will kind of talk about that. And apparently, after the tomb was actually opened in February of 1923, you had a lot of unexplained deaths that occurred. They call it the curse of King Tut's tomb, curse of the mummy, the curse of the Pharaohs. I think these are all kinds of names that the media, like the news media, kind of called it afterwards. And apparently there were as much as like maybe 21 people that may have died mysteriously after King Tut's tomb was opened. Of course, the most famous was Lord Carnarvon himself, died right afterwards. There was even a story where after they opened the tomb, all the lights went out in Cairo, like they lost power, which is very strange about that. But there's been all kinds of theories that, range from natural causes. People just went in there and just died afterwards of natural causes. Bacteria or some kind of virus that was released that was in the tomb for thousands of years may have got reinvigorated when oxygen was added back in to the chambers. And they actually have a new claim that there's radiation in the ground, like uranium or something like that, that's naturally there. Maybe somebody could have gotten radiation poisoning and all that. But Howard Carter, of course, I had showed him right here. He didn't die until the age 64. So I guess the curse didn't kill him till later. Now, I don't know if I believe in the curse, but I think supposedly when they took it, like when I was a kid, like in the I want to say late 1970s, they actually had a tour of like King Tut and his treasures and all that, and I actually saw the death mask, like a long time ago. I remember when I was a kid seeing it, so that was kind of cool. But anyway, so yeah, that's just King Tut, and probably one of the greatest sensations ever was the discovery of King Tut's tomb. I think that and the Rosetta Stone are the 2 biggest things that was, like I said, ever discovered. Now I want to go and also move on and talk about and that's, by the way, some other pictures of the sarcophagus right there. That's his actual throne that supposedly King Tut sat on as well. But yeah, they have Ramses the Great. I did want to mention him as well. He's another great pharaoh, of course, in ancient Egypt in the New Kingdom. Ramses the Great, or also called Ramses II, was the greatest pharaoh of the New Kingdom. He's part of that Ramessids I told you about, 19th, 20th dynasty third pharaoh of the Ramesses of the 19th dynasty, and his reign is considered, by the way, one of the greatest in Egypt's history. It's not quite the longest. I think there may have been one other pharaoh that reigned longer than him, I think during the Old Kingdom, but his is considered one of the longest, reigning somewhere between 66 and 67 years as a pharaoh. I think he came into power when he was a teenager. And then they think that also, I think when he died, he was pushing, I want to say, close to the 80s. And I think there was a claim that used to say that he was like 100 years old when he died. That's not true anymore. But you can see he was pretty old from his mummy looking at right there. But he was the peak of really the New Kingdom's empire, like the size of the New Kingdom and its empire, which stretched into Syria, pretty much peaks under his name. He's got a lot of nicknames. Some people call him the Great Ancestor. That's because of the fact that Ramses had so many children. He had over 100 like sons and daughters that he had through different wives and concubines and all that. And then I think later the Greeks gave him a nickname, which is Ozymandias. You may have heard of that. And there's a famous short poem by Percy Shelley that was written, I think, I want to say in the 19th century, that kind of talks about that, about his reign. And in fact, that's not much left of it, except his mummy and some of these monuments that are still around now. It says there about the story about the Exodus. Some historians think that Ramses may have been the pharaoh in the Exodus story, or maybe he influenced the Exodus story about the time of Moses, but they're not sure about that. The Bible does not mention, the name of the pharaoh, so no one knows. Also, the fact that there was like 11 pharaohs named Ramses, so it could have been any of those pharaohs that could have been. But if Moses lived in the 13th century, that's when Ramses pretty much lived, because he took up most of the 13th century as an actual pharaoh. He is known for his building projects. I guess that's one of the things I'll kind of talk about today, a little about Ramses the Great. He's famous for a bunch of building projects. He's also famous for building a lot of statues of himself all over Egypt. I don't know if you know about Ramses the Great, but he was very egotistical. He thought he was a great ruler, and so he wanted everybody to know about it. And so a lot of times you'll see a lot of statues throughout Egypt that are basically his. Like you can see these two that are right here. Here are the entrance of the Hypostyle Hall, which the Great Hypostyle Hall was a famous part of the Karnak temple complex that was built by basically him and his father, who was Seti the First. So they constructed it. And I don't know if you know much about the Hypostyle Hall. It's considered one of the largest temple type sanctuaries that was kind of built in like the world period, I think. It's huge. And it included 134 columns that are about 70 feet tall. Now, I remember seeing about this one time, but they were saying, I think, one point that about 30 people could stand on top of it. It's the temple. These columns are so huge in size. They had these architraves that they would put on top of them that would kind of hold the roof up that was on top of it. So pretty amazing, some of the construction that went into in building that. Of course, the most famous thing he's known for is he built this temple, several temples actually in southern Egypt near Sudan, the Temple of Ramses the Great at Abu Simbel. That was considered his greatest temple that he built overall as a pharaoh. And it's a rock-cut temple that they actually built out of the bedrock of part of a mountain. And that particular temple was a temple that honored the god Ra, which I think is kind of in the middle, the top there on the picture. And then you see on both sides of him, he's got these two pairs of statues of himself that were huge. They were about 69 feet tall, each one of them. And I don't know if you heard the story about the Temple of Ramses the Great, it was later moved because they were building the Aswan High Dam, which made Lake Nasser. So they had to cut it out and move it higher up so it wouldn't get flooded. And so they actually cut it out like a jigsaw puzzle and put it back together. And after they did that, what happened was that one of the actual statues you can see in the picture there, it fell down. And so that's why it's sitting there, right there. So anyway, I think it's a UNESCO site protected by the UN and all that today. But there's actually statues inside of it that are also pretty huge that they cut out as well, which are statues of him. So he's kind of, like I said, egotistical as an actual ruler. There's another temple he also built that's famous. Here's by the way, a picture of his wife, his main wife anyway, which is Queen Nefertari, who I think gave him a bunch of sons and all that. That was his favorite wife. I think he had several wives, but that's his most famous wife. And some people confuse Nefertari with Nefertiti. They're not the same. Nefertiti was married to Akhenaten, remember, of course. But he built this other temple that's called the Ramesseum, and it became his mortuary temple. And it was a term coined by Jean-Francois Champollion in the early 20th century. And it was the temple where basically his mummy was brought to be mummified, and it honored the god Osiris. It had a bunch of statues of Osiris, which were part of it. I think the heads were all cut off of it by fortune hunters, by the way. And and there's a famous story. I don't know if you heard about this, but they had a huge statue of Ramses the Great that he built there called the Colossal of Ramses the Great, which I think was like 30, 40 feet tall, that was on site, that he erected, I guess to honor himself, of course, and it collapsed. And I think in Egypt, they've actually rebuilt it, like a version of it today. So I think they restored part of it or something like that. And it now has kind of been, I guess, like it was before. But yeah, they had other dynasties. Like I said, after the 19th dynasty, they did have the so-called 20th dynasty that they had, which came later. They had a pharaoh named Ramses III, who reigned around about I think close to about the 12th, 13th century is when he lived. He lived about the same time when the Sea Peoples invaded, and he was famous for like stopping their invasion. In fact, the Egyptians eventually crushed the Sea Peoples, defeated them, and all that. But apparently, he was considered like the last great